Well, hello and welcome to Producer Dan. Thank you so much for stopping by the channel today. Today I am very excited to talk about the Moog Synthesizer. The early Moog Synthesizer, its invention, and its influence on the path that music history took with its invention. And obviously its contribution to all of the different music genres over the decades. The Moog synthesizer is a monophonic analog modular synthesizer invented by engineer Dr. Robert Moog in 1964. The classic Moog synthesizer is made up of separate modules. Oscillators create the waveforms, and the filters filter out either the low frequencies or the high frequencies. The envelope generator modules will further shape that sound over time with its attack, decay, the sustained, and its release times. Robert Moog was a doctoral student at Cornell University. At the age of 19, Robert Moog began his company, R.A. Moog Company, where he built and sold theremins by mail order. The theremin was invented by Leon Theremin and patented in 1928. The theremin is an early electronic musical instrument which is played by making hand gestures between two metal antennas. One antenna modulates the frequency or the pitch, and the other will modulate the volume. What inspires me is not so much the music as the opportunity to interact with composers. I think that has driven everything I've done. Robert Moog met Herb Deutsch at a New York State School Music Association trade fair. Herb Deutsch was a composer and professor of electronic music and composition at Hofstra University. Deutsch was a fan of the theremin and had been making music with the theremin using a tape recorder and a single-pitch oscillator. Having very similar interests, Moog and Deutsch became fast friends and associates. They got together to discuss the possibilities of creating a musical instrument or a portable music studio. And so, with a $16,000 grant from the New York State Small Business Association, Moog hoped to create a portable electronic musical instrument that would appeal to musicians. It was Herb Deutsch that suggested Moog create some kind of filter that would allow the note to fade in and fade out. The prototype for this very first amplitude envelope was created with a doorbell mechanism. So the Moog synthesizer wasn't the first synthesizer or only synthesizer being created at the time. For example, the RCA Mark II used hundreds of vacuum tubes to create its waveforms. Moog took advantage of the newly available smaller silicon transistors to create his VCOs, voltage-controlled oscillators. The very first prototype of the Moog synthesizer had two VCOs. One of these VCOs controlled the other in a way to create a tremolo or vibrato effect. Herb Deutsch was so excited and enthusiastic about this first prototype, he began to create music with it right then and there. He composed the first ever piece for the Moog called Jazz Images, a work song and blues. Moog would then go on to meet Wendy Carlos, a composer studying music composition at the University of Columbia. In 1964, they met at an audio engineering show in New York City. They would develop a partnership in the further development of the Moog synthesizer. Wendy Carlos would order the first early custom-built Moog synthesizers. She would make certain suggestions and offer guidance as a music composer. She's credited for suggesting the touch velocity sensitive keyboard for the Moog synthesizer, among other things. Wendy Carlos is a trans woman who brought the Moog synthesizer to the mainstream's attention with her best-selling album, Switched On Bach, an album of Bach compositions done completely on the Moog synthesizer. Switched On Bach would earn Carlos 3 Grammy Awards. Carlos would then go on to compose the scores for 2 of Stanley Kubrick's films, A Clockwork Orange and The Shining. She also composed the score for Tron and Beauty and the Beast. Vladimir Ussachevsky was also instrumental in the early development of the Moog synthesizer. He was on the faculty at Columbia University from 1947 until 1980, where he was the teacher of Wendy Carlos, and that's how he got involved with the Moog synthesizer. And it was Ussachevsky's specification of the ADSR envelope, attack, decay, sustain, and release, which is common vocabulary when describing envelopes in modern synthesizers and electronic instruments today. And in 1969, Mort Garson composed the soundtrack to the televised Apollo 11 moonwalk, which forever cemented the futuristic sound of the Moog synthesizer with the concept of space exploration in the public consciousness. And it was a suggestion by composer Gustav Ciamaga that Moog create a filter that would remove either high frequencies or low frequencies. This would be the beginning of the cutoff filter that we see on modern synthesizers today. This was patented by Moog on October 28 in 1969 as the ladder filter, and this would be the only item on the synthesizer that Moog would patent. And of course, this new instrument would cause some controversy in the public, being that it had the ability to imitate all kinds of different instruments, particularly orchestral instruments, which threatened the jobs of musicians. And because of this, the instrument was banned from commercial use for a short time in the United States. I was never worried that synthesizers would replace musicians. First of all, you have to be a musician in order to make music with a synthesizer. So in the late 1960s, the Moog synthesizer was still very expensive, and the only people that could afford one were the record labels and recording studios. So the public was beginning to hear the synthesizer in television commercials and in certain songs of certain rock bands. For example, in 1967, The Doors would feature the Moog synthesizer in their song, Strange Days. And in 1969, George Harrison used the Moog synthesizer to record an album called Electric Sound. And in 1969, the Beatles used the Moog synthesizer on their album, Abbey Road. Other notable rock bands to use the Moog synthesizer were the Grateful Dead and the Rolling Stones. And jazz musicians like Herbie Hancock were also getting on board with the Moog synthesizer. And in 1970, rock bands like Yes, Tangerine Dream, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer were using the Moog in their records. Keith Emerson of Emerson, Lake and Palmer was the first rock musician to tour with a Moog modular synthesizer, and it became a huge part of his live performance. It's said that Emerson did for the synthesizer what Jimi Hendrix did for the guitar. His famous Monster Moog, which stood over 10 feet tall and weighed 550 pounds, took 4 roadies to get it on the stage. Keith Emerson's Monster Moog synthesizer was so famous and so influential to the rock genre that in 2014, Moog Music re-released an exact replica of the synthesizer, calling it the EMM, Emerson's Moog Modular System. And in 1970, along with engineers Jim Scott and Bill Hemsath, Moog would create his most well-regarded and influential synthesizer, the Mini Moog, that did away with the patch chords and also introduced the pitch blend wheel. And bands and artists like Pink Floyd, Tangerine Dream, Stevie Wonder all quickly embraced the Mini Moog. The Mini Moog would be re-released in 2016 and again in 2022. Early Moog synthesizer systems were built with a combination of chosen modules, like the Model 10 modular system, built in 1971 through 1973 and reissued again in 2019. The Model 12 modular system from 1972 until 73, the Model 15 from 73 until 81 and reissued in 2015, the System 35 from 1973 until 1981 and again in 2015, and the System 55 from 1973 until 1981 and reissued in 2015. Moog would create and manufacture many different products over the years, like the Moog Taurus. This was a bass pedal synthesizer that was popular with bands like Rush and Led Zeppelin. The Mini Moog Voyager was an updated and upgraded version of the Mini Moog, manufactured and released from 2002 until 2015. This instrument featured digital capabilities which allowed the user to use and create presets. It featured an XY pad and a Vitar velocity-sensitive keyboard featuring aftertouch. In 2005, Robert Moog passed away from brain cancer. His collaborator and business partner, Michael Smith, would take over as president, and the company would become mostly employee-owned, where 62 of the employees owned 49% of the shares. And in 2018, the Moog 1 was released. This is a larger, more complete analog synthesizer system and is the first polyphonic synthesizer to be released by Moog in over 30 years. The Moog 1 features a sequencer, an arpeggiator, 4 LFOs, variable waveform selection, and a full bank of onboard effects. The Moog company would go on to create new products, like the Grandmother, the Matriarch, the Subharmonicon, and the Muse. These products could compete with the new Eurorack-style synthesizers becoming popular. And in 2019, the Moogseum was brought into existence by the Bob Moog Foundation. It celebrates Bob Moog's contribution to electronic music and serves as a historical resource for those electronic music enthusiasts. Everything has some consciousness, and we tap into that. It is about energy at its most basic level. The Moog synthesizer would receive some criticism from people in the beginning, saying that it wasn't real music. Robert Moog was actually a very spiritual person. He felt that the music came from the source through the human being and then into whatever instrument that human was playing, whether it was a stick or a guitar, a piano, or an electronic instrument. There still has to be a human connection for that music to be made. So it's all music, it's all real. So if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy one of these other videos that I recently did on the Fender Rhodes electric piano and the Hammond tone wheel electronic organ. Check those out. They'll be linked in the description below. So I thank you for checking out this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Take care.